My own children locked me away like a prisoner. For 40 years, I sacrificed everything for them, stood by them through every challenge, and celebrated every success. But on that October morning, as they drove me to Riverside Manor and signed the papers to commit me, I realized a truth I'd been avoiding for 5 years. To them, I wasn't their mother anymore. I was just a problem to be managed. What they didn't know was that I was fully aware of everything they'd done. Every dollar stolen, every lie told, every document forged. And while they walked out of that facility believing they'd finally dealt with their inconvenient mother, I was already planning their complete destruction. I'm 65 years old. My name is Eleanor Mitchell, and this is the story of how my children tried to bury me alive, and how I buried them instead. The day they put me in the nursing home started like any other manipulation. My daughter Sarah arrived at her house, where I'd been living for the past 3 years, with a bright smile and a cheerful voice. She told me we were going to see a new doctor, someone who specialized in memory issues. I knew it was a lie. I'd known for months that they were planning something. I'd overheard the phone calls, seen the brochures hidden in drawers, read the emails left open on the computer they thought I was too confused to use. But I said nothing. I got dressed. I put on my shoes. I got into the car. Sarah chatted pleasantly during the drive, talking about the weather, about her children, about everything except where we were really going. Her husband, Mark, drove in silence, his jaw tight, his eyes avoiding mine in the rearview mirror. When we pulled up to Riverside Manor, a sprawling brick building with bars on some of the windows and a sign that read, Memory Care Unit, Sarah's mask finally slipped. She told me this was for my own good, that I needed professional supervision, that I'd been getting confused lately, forgetting things, becoming difficult to manage. Every word was a carefully constructed lie. I hadn't forgotten anything. I remembered everything. That was precisely the problem. The admissions director was a thin woman with tired eyes who'd clearly processed hundreds of unwilling elderly people. She spoke slowly and loudly, as if I were deaf or stupid. Sarah answered questions about me, as though I weren't sitting right there. My medical history, my daily routine, my mental state. She painted a picture of a confused, declining woman who could no longer care for herself. I signed the papers they put in front of me. I watched my daughter forge my signature on the ones they told me I'd already signed earlier. I let them take my purse, my phone, my keys. I let them lead me to a small room with a hospital bed, a plastic chair, and a window that looked out onto a parking lot. Sarah kissed my cheek before she left. She promised to visit soon. She said she loved me. Then she walked out, and I heard the click of the lock on the door, not to keep others out, to keep me in. I sat on that narrow bed in that sterile room, and I did not cry. Crying was for people who still believed they might be saved. I was past believing in rescue. What I believed in now was revenge. Cold, methodical, legally airtight revenge. They thought they'd won. They had no idea the war had just begun. To understand how I got to that moment, you need to understand what my life was before my children decided I was worth more to them as a victim than as a mother. You need to know what they destroyed. I met my husband James when I was 23 years old. He was a postal worker with steady hands and a quiet laugh. We married 6 months later in a small church ceremony that cost less than $200. We were poor, but we were happy. That kind of simple happiness that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you want from life. We had 3 children in 5 years. Sarah first, then Michael, then Jennifer. James worked 6 days a week. I stayed home with the babies, stretched every dollar, made every meal from scratch, sewed clothes when I could. We saved money in coffee cans hidden in the back of the pantry. We dreamed small dreams and mostly achieved them. James was a good man. Not perfect, but good. He remembered birthdays. He helped with dishes. He read stories to the children at night, even when he was exhausted. When Sarah was 8 and broke her arm falling off her bike, he sat with her in the emergency room for 6 hours, holding her hand, telling her stories to distract her from the pain. We bought our house when I was 31. A small 2-bedroom bungalow in a working-class neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business. The mortgage payment was $340 a month. We thought we'd won the lottery. I raised those children in that house. I taught them to read before they started school. I made Halloween costumes by hand. I attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every soccer game. James coached Little League on weekends. We took one vacation every 3 years, driving to see family or camping at state parks. We weren't wealthy, but we were rich in the ways that mattered. Or so I believed. The children grew up the way children do. Sarah was the determined one, always organizing the others, always planning ahead. Michael was the sensitive one, artistic and quiet. Jennifer was the baby, cheerful and easygoing. I loved them equally and completely. I would have died for any one of them. When Sarah went to college, we took out loans. When Michael needed art supplies, we bought them. When Jennifer wanted dance lessons, we found the money. James and I sacrificed everything we had to give them opportunities we never had. They did well. Sarah became an office manager. Michael got a job at a graphic design firm. Jennifer went into real estate. They married, had children of their own, bought houses bigger than ours. We were so proud. We thought we'd done everything right. James died 5 years ago. Heart attack at the post office, 2 months before his retirement. He was 67 years old. One moment he was sorting mail, joking with a coworker. The next moment he was gone. The grief nearly destroyed me. We'd been married for 42 years. He was my best friend, my partner, my whole adult life. The house felt impossibly empty without him. I didn't know how to sleep alone. I didn't know how to make dinner for one person. I didn't know how to exist in a world where James wasn't there to share it with. The children were wonderful at first. They called every day. They visited on weekends. Sarah organized the funeral and handled all the paperwork I couldn't face. Michael helped me sort through James's belongings. Jennifer stayed with me for a week, sleeping in her old bedroom, making sure I ate. But then the life insurance came through. $150,000. James had been paying on that policy for 30 years, making sure I'd be taken care of if something happened to him. It was meant to give me security, independence, peace of mind. Instead, it made me a target. Sarah was the first to suggest I shouldn't be living alone. The house was too big, she said. Too many stairs, too many memories. She worried about me. What if I fell? What if I had a medical emergency and no one was there? She and Mark had plenty of room in their house. I could have the guest room. It would be temporary, just until I figured things out. Until I healed enough to think clearly about my future. I should have said no. I should have recognized the trap. But I was drowning in grief, and she threw me a rope. So I took it. I moved into Sarah's house thinking it would be for a few months. I brought some clothes, some photos, a few of James's things I couldn't bear to leave behind. We put most of my furniture in storage. We'd deal with the house later, Sarah assured me. There was no rush. At first it was fine. Sarah and Mark both worked. I watched my grandchildren after school. I cooked dinner. I cleaned the house. I tried to be helpful, tried to justify taking up their space. But slowly, subtly, things began to change. Sarah suggested I should consolidate my finances, make things simpler. She offered to manage my accounts, pay my bills, handle the paperwork. She was good with money, she reminded me. It was her job, and I was still so sad, so overwhelmed. Why not let her help? I signed a power of attorney. I added her name to my bank accounts. I gave her access to everything, the biggest mistake of my life. My pension from James's Postal Service career was deposited automatically every month. $2,800. It wasn't a fortune, but it was steady, reliable income, enough to live on modestly, enough to maintain my independence, except I never saw that money. Sarah told me it was going into a special account, building up for my future needs. I should trust her. She knew what she was doing. I trusted her. She was my daughter. The first time I asked for money, Sarah's face did something strange. A flicker of annoyance, quickly masked by concern. She asked what I needed it for. When I said I wanted to buy gifts for the grandchildren's birthdays, she told me not to worry about it. She'd take care of it. She'd put my name on the cards. The second time I asked, needing money to replace a pair of worn-out shoes, she asked if I'd looked in my closet recently. She'd just bought me new shoes last month, didn't I remember? Maybe I should mention this forgetfulness to my doctor. The third time I asked, her voice was sharp. Did I think money grew on trees? Did I know how expensive it was to support an extra person in the house? Maybe I should be more grateful instead of constantly asking for things. I stopped asking. Michael and Jennifer started visiting more often. Family dinners that felt like interrogations. They'd exchange glances when I spoke. They'd interrupt me to correct details of stories I'd told 100 times. Sarah would make comments about my memory, how I repeated myself, how I got confused about dates. I wasn't confused. I was being gaslighted. But I didn't have the vocabulary for that yet. I just knew something was deeply wrong. My belongings started disappearing. First small things. A bracelet James gave me on our 20th anniversary. A ring my mother left me. When I asked Sarah about them, she looked concerned. She said I must have misplaced them. Maybe in the move? Things get lost. Then bigger things. Furniture from storage. When I asked to visit the unit, Sarah said it had been cleared out. She'd sold everything because the monthly fee was too expensive. She'd kept the important items, of course. She'd show me where she'd put them. She never did. I tried to call my old friends. The phone would ring and ring with no answer. I learned later that Sarah had called them all, explaining that I was declining, that phone conversations confused me, that it was better to limit contact. She'd isolated me systematically, and I hadn't even realized it was happening. Visits to the doctor became strange. Sarah would come into the examination room with me, answering questions before I could speak, describing symptoms I didn't have, suggesting tests I didn't need. The doctor would nod sympathetically and write prescriptions for medications I'd never heard of. When I protested, Sarah's voice would get that concerned, patient tone. She'd tell the doctor that I was often resistant to treatment, that I didn't always understand my own limitations. She'd squeeze my hand, smile sadly, and the doctor would look at me with pity. I was being erased. Slowly, methodically, completely. I was becoming invisible in my own life. The breaking point came in the spring. I'd been living with Sarah for almost 3 years. I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Sarah was in the kitchen, talking on the phone with Michael. She didn't know I was in the hallway, that I'd come downstairs for a glass of water. She was talking about nursing homes, discussing costs, something called Medicaid spend-down. Her voice was businesslike, calculating. She mentioned a facility called Riverside Manor. It was cheaper than most, she said. Clean enough. It would free up a lot of resources. She laughed at something Michael said. Then she said the words that changed everything. She told him it was time to stop pretending this was temporary. I was becoming too expensive, too much work. Mark was getting frustrated. The kids were getting older and needed their space. Plus, the house was worth real money now. The real estate market had improved. They could sell it, put me somewhere cheap, and finally have the capital they needed for their plans. Michael agreed immediately. He mentioned something about an investment opportunity, something he and Jennifer had been discussing. The timing would be perfect. I stood in that dark hallway, glass in my hand, and understood that my children had been planning my disposal like I was an unwanted piece of furniture. They'd been stealing my money for years. They'd sold my house without telling me. They'd isolated me from everyone who might help. And now they were going to lock me away so they could liquidate what remained of my life. I went back upstairs. I did not confront them. I did not cry. I lay in that narrow bed in that guest room that had become a prison, and I began to plan. I knew I couldn't fight them openly. I had no money of my own. No phone, no car, no allies. Sarah had legal authority over my finances. She had doctors who'd testify I was declining. She had years of careful groundwork laid, but I had something she didn't account for. I was completely, totally lucid, and I was paying attention. For the next 6 months, I watched and listened and remembered everything. Every comment about nursing homes, every discussion of my finances, every lie told to doctors. I memorized dates and details. I made mental notes of witnesses. I waited. When they finally came to take me to Riverside Manor, I was ready. Not to escape, but to begin documenting everything that would eventually destroy them. The first 3 days in the nursing home were the hardest. The facility was clean enough, like Sarah had promised, but it was still a cage. My room was barely large enough for the bed and chair. The bathroom was institutional, with grab bars and a shower seat that made me feel ancient. The meals were served at specific times on plastic trays. Other residents wandered the halls, some of them genuinely confused, some of them just desperately bored. The staff was overworked and underpaid. They weren't cruel, just exhausted. They had too many patients and not enough time. They called everyone honey and sweetie, infantilizing voices that made my teeth ache. They checked boxes on charts and moved on to the next room. I could have despaired. Instead, I watched and learned. I learned the staff rotation. I learned which nurses actually cared and which were just collecting paychecks. I learned which residents were sharp and which were lost. I learned the facility's routines, its rhythms, its weak points. And then, on the fourth day, something extraordinary happened. Something I hadn't planned for. Something that would change everything. A nurse practitioner named Patricia came to do my intake evaluation. It was a standard assessment, required for all new residents. She was about 50, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that looked tired but kind. She asked me the usual question: my medical history, my medications, my family situation. But unlike everyone else, she actually waited for my answers. She didn't talk over me or interrupt. She looked directly at me, not at the chart. When she got to the financial section, she asked about my income. Standard question, necessary for billing purposes. I told her the truth. I had a pension, $2,800 a month from my late husband's postal service career. Patricia looked up from her chart. She asked where the money was deposited. I said I didn't know anymore. My daughter managed my finances. Something changed in Patricia's expression. Not pity, something harder, more alert. She asked how long this arrangement had been in place. About 3 years, I told her. She asked if I received statements, if I knew how much was in my accounts, if I had access to my own money. No. And Patricia set down her pen. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw recognition in her eyes. She'd seen this before. She knew exactly what she was looking at. She asked if I wanted help. The question hung in the air between us. It was the first time in 3 years anyone had asked me what I wanted. The first time anyone had treated me like a person capable of making decisions about my own life. I said yes. Patricia reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. Elder Advocacy Coalition, it read. She told me these people helped seniors in difficult situations. Financial exploitation, abuse, neglect. They worked with lawyers who specialized in elder law. Everything would be confidential. She said I had rights. That a power of attorney didn't erase my autonomy. That my pension was my money, not my daughter's. That if I was competent, which I clearly was, I could revoke that power of attorney and take control of my own affairs. I took the card. I held it like it was made of gold. Patricia said there was a phone in the common room. She'd make sure I had privacy to use it. She'd make sure my call wasn't monitored or recorded. She'd come back tomorrow to check on me. She didn't promise miracles. She didn't say everything would be fine. She just treated me like a human being who deserved agency over her own life. After 3 years of being managed and controlled and dismissed, that alone was revolutionary. That afternoon, while most residents napped and the staff took their break, I made the call. My hands shook as I dialed the number. A woman answered. Her name was Lisa. She was a social worker with the advocacy group. I told her I thought my daughter was stealing from me. I told her about the power of attorney, the missing pension, the house I didn't know had been sold. I told her I'd been put in a nursing home against my will to keep me from discovering the full extent of the theft. Lisa didn't sound shocked. She sounded grimly unsurprised. She asked if I was mentally competent to handle my own affairs. I said yes. She asked if I'd signed anything under duress or while medicated. I said yes to the first, no to the second. She asked if I wanted to fight. I said I wanted to destroy them. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Then she said she'd send someone the next day. An attorney who specialized in elder financial abuse. Pro bono, if I had no access to funds. She asked if my daughter knew I'd made this call. Not yet, I said. And I intended to keep it that way. Good, Lisa said. Surprise was an advantage. If my daughter thought I was helpless, she'd keep being sloppy. And sloppy people left evidence. The attorney's name was Robert Chen. He came to Riverside Manor the next afternoon, carrying a briefcase and wearing a suit that had seen better days. He was 55 or so, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a handshake that was firm without being performative. We met in a small conference room usually used for family meetings. Patricia made sure we had privacy. Robert opened his briefcase and pulled out a legal pad. He told me exactly what Lisa had said. I had rights. A power of attorney wasn't a guardianship. Unless I'd been declared legally incompetent by a court, which I hadn't, I could revoke that document at any time. I could demand access to my bank records. I could hire my own attorney and file suit for financial exploitation. He asked me to tell him everything, so I did. I told him about James's death and the life insurance, about moving in with Sarah and signing the power of attorney, about the pension that disappeared every month, about my belongings being sold, about being told I was confused and forgetful when I was neither, about overhearing the conversation about nursing home costs and liquidating assets, about being brought here against my will and locked in. Robert took notes in neat, precise handwriting. He asked clarifying questions, dates, amounts, names, witnesses. Then he asked the question that mattered. Did I want my money back, or did I want justice? I didn't hesitate. Both, I said. Every dollar and every consequence they deserved. Robert smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who'd seen too many cases like mine and was tired of watching families get away with it. He said we'd need evidence. Bank records going back 5 years. Real estate records for my house. The power of attorney document itself. Medical records proving I was competent. Documentation of everything I'd told him. Witnesses who could testify to my mental state, both before and after the move to Riverside. He'd file a request for bank records immediately. As my attorney, he had the right to access them on my behalf. If Sarah had been diverting funds, it would show up. If she'd sold the house and kept the proceeds, there would be a paper trail. If she'd forged my signature on any documents, handwriting analysis would prove it. He'd also file for emergency removal of her power of attorney and request a competency evaluation by an independent medical professional. We'd prove I was sharp as ever and that her claims of my decline were fabricated. Then we'd file a civil suit for financial exploitation, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraud. We'd demand full restitution of all diverted funds, plus damages, plus legal fees. And finally, he'd contact Adult Protective Services and the district attorney's office. What Sarah had done wasn't just a civil matter. It was criminal elder abuse. She could go to prison. The process would take time, Robert warned. Months, not weeks. We needed to be thorough. We needed to be airtight, and we needed to be patient. I told him patience was something I'd become very good at. We shook hands. Robert said he'd be in touch as soon as the bank records came through. In the meantime, I should document everything. Write down every visit from my children, every conversation, every promise they made or broke. Save every card they sent, every phone message they left. Build a timeline, build a case. I spent the next 2 weeks writing. I filled a legal pad with everything I could remember. Dates Sarah had told doctors I was confused. Conversations where Michael discussed using my money for his business. Times Jennifer had benefited from purchases she claimed were for me. I listed every piece of jewelry that had vanished, every piece of furniture sold, every friend I'd been cut off from. Patricia checked on me daily. She made sure I was safe, that my communications with Robert were private, that no one suspected what I was doing. She also documented my mental status in her official reports. Alert and oriented ×4. Able to manage finances independently. Inappropriately placed in memory care. Her notes would be crucial later. Sarah visited once in those 2 weeks. She breezed in with a box of cookies from a grocery store bakery and a bright false smile. She asked how I was adjusting. I told her fine, playing the role of passive, grateful mother. She said she'd be back soon. She never asked if I needed anything. She never asked if I was happy. She checked a box on her mental to-do list and left. I watched her go and felt absolutely nothing. The woman who just left wasn't my daughter anymore. She was a stranger wearing my daughter's face. Whatever love I'd felt for her had been systematically murdered by her own actions. 3 weeks after my first meeting with Robert, the bank records arrived. He came to Riverside in the evening, after visiting hours, and spread them across the conference room table like evidence at a crime scene. And that's exactly what they were. For 5 years, my pension had been deposited into an account with both our names on it. $2,800 every single month, like clockwork. For 5 years, Sarah had been transferring every penny into her personal account the same day it arrived. Not most of it, not some of it. Every single dollar, 60 months. Times $2,800, $168,000. Robert showed me the statements, pointing to each transfer with his pen. The deposits came from the Office of Personnel Management. The withdrawals went to an account in Sarah's name only. The pattern was absolutely consistent, automatic, systematic, but it didn't stop there. My savings account, the one James and I had spent 40 years building, had held $45,000 after his life insurance was deposited. Within 6 months of me signing the power of attorney, it was empty, withdrawn in chunks of $5,000 and $10,000, always just under the reporting threshold that would trigger automatic review. My house had sold 18 months ago for $320,000. I'd never seen a penny. The proceeds had gone into Sarah's account, then been distributed to Michael and Jennifer, $70,000 each to my other children. The rest had paid off Sarah and Mark's mortgage. My life had been liquidated, parceled out among my children like inheritance before I was even dead. Except they hadn't waited for me to die naturally. They'd simply erased me while I was still breathing. The total was over $533,000. Robert watched my face as I processed the numbers. He told me this was one of the most clear-cut cases of elder financial abuse he'd ever seen. The paper trail was perfect. Every transaction documented, every theft recorded. Sarah had been so confident in her control over me that she hadn't even bothered to hide what she was doing. Her arrogance would destroy her. Robert already had a forensic accountant analyzing the statements. He'd filed the competency evaluation request, and I'd be assessed within the week. He'd contacted Adult Protective Services, and they'd opened an investigation. He'd notified the district attorney's office that criminal charges would be warranted. Now came the part that would hurt. He needed permission to contact Michael and Jennifer, to depose them, to get their statements on record, because if they'd knowingly accepted stolen money, they were accomplices to the crime. I gave him permission without hesitation. They'd made their choices. They'd taken the money. They'd left me locked in this facility without a backward glance. Whatever happened to them now was justice, not cruelty. The competency evaluation took place on a Monday morning. An independent neuropsychologist spent 3 hours with me, administering tests, asking questions, assessing my memory, and reasoning and judgment. I scored perfectly on everything. The report was unambiguous. Eleanor Mitchell is a fully competent adult with no cognitive impairment whatsoever. Current placement in memory care facility is inappropriate and appears to have been done for reasons unrelated to her mental status. Robert filed that report along with a motion for emergency removal of Sarah's power of attorney and a restraining order preventing her from accessing any accounts with my name on them. We filed the civil suit the same day. Sarah Jane Mitchell, Michael James Mitchell, and Jennifer Louise Thompson are being sued for elder financial abuse, fraud, theft, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We demand full restitution of $533,000 plus interest, legal fees, and punitive damages. We served all 3 of them simultaneously. On a Wednesday afternoon, a process server showed up at Sarah's office, at Michael's home, and at Jennifer's real estate agency. 3 separate lawsuits, identical charges. The reactions came within hours. Sarah called Riverside Manor in a panic. The staff told her I was unavailable. She demanded to speak to her mother. They said I was with my attorney and couldn't be disturbed. She threatened to come down there and remove me. They informed her that she no longer had legal authority to do so. Her power of attorney had been revoked by court order. I wasn't there for that conversation, but Patricia told me later that Sarah's voice had gone shrill with panic and rage. She demanded to know who had done this, who had poisoned my mind against her. The staff had politely declined to provide information and ended the call. Michael called Jennifer, and Jennifer called Sarah, and the 3 of them had an emergency meeting. I know this because Robert had already filed for depositions, and their panicked phone calls became part of the record. They hired attorneys, 3 separate attorneys, because their interests weren't aligned anymore. Sarah needed a criminal defense lawyer. Michael and Jennifer needed someone who could argue they'd acted in good faith, not knowing the money was stolen. That argument fell apart immediately. Bank records showed they'd known exactly where the money came from. Emails between them discussed my pension payments. Text messages joked about the inheritance they were collecting early. The district attorney filed criminal charges 2 months after we filed the civil suit. Sarah was charged with 4 counts of theft, over $100,000, 2 counts of forgery, and 3 counts of criminal elder abuse. Michael and Jennifer were charged as accessories after the fact and with theft by receiving. All 3 were arrested on the same morning. Sarah at her home, in front of her neighbors. Michael at his office, escorted out by police. Jennifer at an open house she was hosting, in front of potential buyers. The publicity was immediate and brutal. Local news picked up the story. Daughter accused of stealing $500,000 from elderly mother, locking her in nursing home. The details were sensational. The evidence was damning. The public was outraged. The trial was set for 6 months later. In the meantime, Robert worked on the civil case. We had the bank record. We had the forensic accountant's report. We had Patricia's medical documentation. We had witness testimony from my old neighbors who'd seen my isolation. We had the power of attorney, document that handwriting experts confirmed I'd signed but hadn't understood due to emotional manipulation so soon after James's death. Sarah's attorney tried to argue that the power of attorney was legitimate and that she'd managed my money appropriately. Robert destroyed that argument in 15 minutes by showing that she'd transferred every single penny to herself and spent it on her own lifestyle. Michael's attorney tried to argue he'd believed the money was a gift. Robert produced text messages where Michael specifically mentioned taking his share of my pension before I died and didn't need it anymore. Jennifer's attorney tried to argue she'd thought Sarah had my permission. Robert showed emails where Jennifer asked if I knew about the house sale and Sarah replied that I didn't need to know. 6 months after they put me in Riverside Manor, we all stood in a courtroom together for the first time since this began. Sarah looked thinner, older. Her confidence had crumbled into desperation. Her husband Mark sat behind her, but there was distance between them. He'd filed for divorce 2 weeks earlier. He was trying to protect his own assets, trying to avoid being dragged down with her. Michael looked angry, bitter. He'd lost his job when the charges were filed. His wife had left him, taking their kids. He'd been forced to sell his house to pay attorney fees. He glared at me like this was somehow my fault. Jennifer just looked defeated. Her real estate license had been suspended. Her marriage was barely hanging on. She cried throughout most of the proceedings, which would have moved me if I'd had any sympathy left to give. I sat with Robert on the plaintiff's side and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Barbara Hendricks. She'd been on the bench for 20 years and had a reputation for taking elder abuse cases seriously. She listened to the evidence for 2 days without interruption. Then she delivered her ruling. She said she'd seen many cases of financial exploitation over her career. She'd seen desperate people make bad decisions. She'd seen families struggle with the burden of care and make mistakes. This was not that. This was calculated, systematic, long-term theft. This was 3 adult children bleeding their mother dry and then disposing of her when she became inconvenient. This was elder abuse in its purest, most despicable form. She ordered full restitution. Sarah would pay back $343,000, the bulk of what she'd stolen. Michael would pay $95,000. Jennifer would pay $95,000. They had 90 days to begin payments or face asset seizure. She awarded me an additional $150,000 in punitive damages to be split equally among them. She ordered them to pay my legal fees in full, and she issued a permanent restraining order. None of them could contact me, visit me, or come within 500 feet of me for the rest of my life without written permission from the court. Total judgment, $733,000. Sarah collapsed in her chair. Michael swore loudly enough that the bailiff threatened to hold him in contempt. Jennifer just buried her face in her hands. The criminal trial followed 3 months later. I had to testify. I had to sit on that stand and describe every humiliation, every theft, every lie. I had to look at my daughter across the courtroom and say out loud that she'd stolen from me, isolated me, and locked me away. She stared at me the whole time with something between hatred and disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend that I'd fought back, as if she'd really believed I was too weak, too stupid, too broken to seek justice. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts for Sarah. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in state prison, eligible for parole in 2, guilty on lesser charges for Michael and Jennifer. The judge sentenced them each to 2 years, with the possibility of serving it as probation if they made their restitution payments on time. Mark divorced Sarah before she went to prison. He got custody of their children, my grandchildren. I haven't seen them since this started. Maybe someday they'll want to know the truth about what their mother did. Maybe not. That's not my choice to make. Michael's wife never came back. He lives in a small apartment now, working a job that barely covers his court-ordered payments. He'll be paying me for the next 10 years. Jennifer's husband stayed, but their marriage is hollow. They had to sell their house. She works as an administrative assistant now, her real estate career destroyed. She sends the checks every month without a note, just payments. Like a bill she'll never finish paying. I got $534,000 back over the course of 18 months. Not everything, but most of it. Enough. I used some of it to buy back my house from the people Sarah sold it to. They'd been shocked by the whole scandal and sold it back to me at cost. I spent 3 months making it mine again. New paint, new furniture, erasing every trace of what had happened there, but I didn't move back in. Too many memories, too much grief layered on top of grief. Instead, I sold it for a small profit and used the money to move into an independent senior living community. A real one, not a nursing home, not a facility. A place where I have my own apartment, my own life, my own choices. It's small. A bedroom, a living area, a kitchen I barely use. But it's mine. Truly, completely mine. My name on the lease. My money paying the rent. My decision to be here. I reconnected with old friends that Sarah had cut me off from. I joined a book club. I volunteer 3 days a week at the Elder Advocacy Coalition, helping other victims of family financial abuse. I share my story. I help them understand their rights. I hold their hands while they make the phone calls that will change their lives. Patricia and I have coffee every month. She saved my life and we both know it. She tells me about other residents at Riverside who might need help. I connect them with resources. We've created a quiet network of protection for people whose families see them as burdens instead of humans. Robert became a friend. He took my case pro bono, but I insisted on paying him from the restitution once it came through. He used the money to hire another attorney for his practice, someone dedicated specifically to elder law. They're drowning in cases. Elder abuse is an epidemic, and most victims never fight back. I think about my children sometimes. Not often, not with love. Mostly with a kind of sad curiosity. I wonder if Sarah, sitting in her cell, understands what she did wrong. If Michael, writing his monthly checks, has learned anything about integrity. If Jennifer, living her diminished life, regrets her choices. I doubt it. People like them believe they're victims of their own consequences. They blame me for fighting back, not themselves for creating a situation that required fighting. My grandchildren are teenagers now, old enough to ask questions, old enough to understand that the grandmother they barely remember isn't the villain their mother probably painted. I wonder if they'll reach out someday. If they'll want to hear my side, I'll tell them the truth if they ask. Not to turn them against their parents, but because they deserve to know that love without boundaries enables abuse. That family isn't a free pass for cruelty. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do is walk away. I'm 70 years old now. 5 years past the day they locked me in Riverside Manor. 5 years past the day I decided I was worth fighting for. I live quietly now. Small joys. Morning coffee on my balcony. Books from the library. Conversations with friends who value me. Helping others escape the traps I barely escaped myself. People ask if I regret what happened. If I wish I'd stayed silent, kept the peace, maintained the illusion of family. The answer is no. What my children took from me was money. What I would have lost by staying silent was myself, my dignity, my autonomy, my fundamental right to exist as a human being with value beyond my utility. At 65, locked in a nursing home, I discovered something remarkable. I was strong enough to fight, smart enough to win, worthy enough to demand justice. They tried to bury me. They tried to erase me. They tried to steal not just my money, but my entire existence. They failed. I'm still here, still standing, still helping others stand, and they're still paying for what they did. Every month, every year, for the rest of their lives. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting free.